Dust swirled across the weathered trading post as Lone Wolf approached with his prized chickens. The Apache scout, who had served both the U.S. Cavalry and his own people, now stood alone between two worlds that neither fully accepted him. Inside, he spotted her, a Spanish woman with defiant eyes, being offered to the highest bidder. 2 chickens later, Isabella became his wife in name only. He sought simple companionship. She needed escape. Neither expected what followed as they journeyed through a frontier where both faced contempt and danger. Could a desperate bargain between strangers truly blossom into something neither dared hope for? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The first rays of dawn painted the Arizona sky as Lone Wolf fastened his cavalry scout badge to his worn leather vest. This small piece of metal represented his life caught between two worlds, not fully Apache, not fully white. He studied it in his palm before pinning it in place, a daily reminder of his precarious position. Fort Willow rose from the desert like an unwelcome visitor. Its wooden walls and American flagged, a declaration of ownership over land that had belonged to his ancestors for generations. Lone Wolf guided his pinto horse along the familiar trail, his keen eyes scanning the horizon out of habit. 8 years. As a scout had taught him that danger rarely announced itself, Captain James Thornton waited by the stables, his red beard neatly trimmed beneath a face weathered by the relentless sun. Unlike most white officers, Thornton treated Lone Wolf with something approaching respect. "Morning," the captain called. "Any sign of those Comanche raiders?" "Tracks heading north, 3 days old, 6 men, 7 horses." Lone Wolf dismounted, his voice carrying the slight accent of a man who had learned English late. "They cross into New Mexico territory by now." Thornton nodded, making notes in his small leather book. "That matches what the stage driver reported. Good work." He paused, studying the scout's face. "You look tired. Trouble at home?" "Home." The word stirred memories Lone Wolf preferred to keep buried. Not the small cabin he'd built at the edge of Copper Springs, but the Apache camp where he'd spent his first 12 summers before the soldiers came, before his mother died of the white man's coughing sickness, before his father sent him to live with the missionary family to learn the white man's ways and language. "No trouble, Lone." Wolf answered simply, "Well, you've earned a rest. Take 2 days. Report back Monday." The captain returned to his duties, leaving Lone Wolf to tend his horse dot as he brushed down the pinto. Sergeant Miller sauntered over, tobacco juice staining his unkempt beard. "Captain's mighty soft on you, Injun. Rest of us got a patrol tomorrow." Lone Wolf continued his work without response. Miller was a small man with small thoughts. His words meant nothing. "Hey, I'm talking to you, Scout." Miller spat a brown stream that landed deliberately close to Lone Wolf's moccasins. "Found yourself a woman yet? Or do Injuns prefer their horses?" He laughed at his own crude joke. "Captain says I rest 2 days." Lone Wolf led his horse toward the water trough, deliberately turning his back on the sergeant. "Watch yourself, half-breed. Army won't need scouts forever." Miller's words followed him like flies on a carcass. The ride to his cabin took an hour, following the creek that fed the sparse grasses and stunted juniper trees. The small structure came into view, smoke curling from the stone chimney, a surprise that stopped Lone Wolf in his tracks. He had left no fire burning. Cautiously, he dismounted and approached on silent feet, hand resting on the knife at his belt. Through the single window, he saw White Dove, his father's sister, tending the fireplace. Relief loosened the tension in his shoulders. "Nephew," she greeted him as he entered, not turning from her work. Her gray-streaked hair hung in 2 braids, and her hands moved with practiced efficiency as she stirred a pot of stew. "Your spirit called to me. I brought food. Thank you, Aunt. He settled on the hand-hewn bench, watching as she worked. Though she lived with what remained of their band in the hills, White Dove sometimes visited, bringing news and reminders of the old ways. The elders speak of you, she said after they had eaten. They say you forget who you are. Lone Wolf stared into the fire. I forget nothing. You live alone, between worlds. This is not our way. Her weathered face revealed nothing, but her words carried the weight of tribal judgment. You need a woman, children, to continue our blood. He laughed without humor. What Apache woman would marry a scout who leads blue coats to her people? Not all raids are war parties. Some are stolen horses, murdered settlers. You know this. White Dove's eyes hardened. But you are right. No woman of our people would have you now. The truth stung, though he'd known it for years. Too Apache for the whites, too white for the Apache. Lone Wolf stood and moved to the small box beneath his sleeping pallet. From it he removed a beaded medicine pouch made by his mother years ago. He never wore it where white men could see, but in the privacy of his cabin, he sometimes took comfort in its familiar weight around his neck. I walk my path alone, he said finally. White Dove shook her head. The Creator did not make people to walk alone. She gathered her shawl and stood. I return to the mountains tomorrow. Come with me. Your father asks for you. Lone Wolf tensed. My father sent me away to save your life. The soldiers would have taken all children to their school. He kept you from being buried in the white man's graveyard. Her voice softened. He grows old. His heart aches for his son. The weight of memory pressed down on Lone Wolf, his father's face, as he'd handed his only child to the missionary. No tears, no words, just a warrior's stoic acceptance of necessity. 15 years had passed since that day. I will think on it, he said, knowing he would not go. His father had made his choice. Lone Wolf had made his own. After White Dove departed at dawn, the cabin felt emptier than before. He spent the day repairing a leak in the roof, hunting a rabbit for his supper, and trying not to think about his aunt's words. But in the silent night, as owls called from the darkness, loneliness settled over him like a heavy blanket. The next morning, Lone Wolf rode into Copper Springs, a town that barely deserved the name one dusty street, lined with false-fronted buildings, most in various stages of decay. Men lounged outside the saloon, their eyes following him with undisguised hostility. Women gathered their skirts as he passed, as if his very presence might contaminate them. Jackson's trading post occupied the largest building, its porch sagging beneath the weight of barrels, farm implements, and a motley collection of furniture, waiting for buyers. Inside, the familiar smells of leather, tobacco, and coffee mingled in the dim light. Amos Jackson, a heavy-set man with a permanent sheen of sweat on his forehead, looked up from his ledger. Lone Wolf, what brings you to town? Need coffee, flour. He placed a small pouch of coins on the counter, his monthly pay from the Cavalry. Meager though it was. Jackson nodded, turning to gather the supplies. 2 cowboys entered, their spurs jingling with each step. They noticed Lone Wolf and exchanged smirks. Well, if it ain't the Injun scout, the taller one drawled. Heard you. Been leading the cavalry on wild goose chases. Can't even track your own people, right? Lone Wolf kept his eyes on Jackson, who studiously avoided the confrontation as he measured coffee beans. Maybe he's helping his red brothers, the second cowboy suggested, telling the soldiers to look north when the war parties headed south. That'd make him a traitor. The first man moved closer, deliberately bumping against Lone Wolf's shoulder. And traitors get hung around here. Jackson finally looked up. Now, boys, I don't want no trouble in my store. Lone Wolf, here's a paying customer. Paying with what? Scalps? The cowboy laughed, revealing tobacco-stained teeth. Lone Wolf gathered his purchases, wrapping them carefully in his saddlebag. The cowboys blocked his path to the door. "I asked you a question, Injun. Let him pass, Harlow." Jackson's voice carried a note of warning. "Sheriff won't take kindly to you starting fights in my place." The mention of the sheriff gave the cowboys pause. Reluctantly, they stepped aside, but the taller one leaned in as Lone Wolf passed. "Watch your back, Scout. Accidents happen all the time out in those hills." Outside, Lone Wolf mounted his horse, a familiar knot of anger and resignation tight in his chest. This was as life tolerated for his skills, despised for his blood. White Dove was right about one thing. He couldn't continue alone forever. But what choice did he have? As he rode past the saloon, a commotion caught his attention. A crowd had gathered around a canvas-covered wagon where a red-faced man with an impressive mustache was shouting, "Ladies and gentlemen of Copper Springs, I bring you opportunities from the civilized East. Farm equipment, tonics guaranteed to cure what ails you, and," he paused dramatically, "brides for lonely bachelors." Curious despite himself, Lone Wolf guided his horse closer. The crowd parted reluctantly, murmuring as he approached. From the wagon emerged 3 women, blinking in the harsh sunlight. 2 were clearly sisters, with matching pinched expressions and drab dresses. But the third. Her black hair was gathered loosely at the nape of her neck, a few strands escaping to frame a face that held both pride and fear. Her dress, though travel-worn, had once been fine, its deep blue fabric setting off eyes that defiantly scanned. The crowd, not American, Lone Wolf realized. Spanish, perhaps, or Mexican. "This one," the mustached man continued, placing a hand on the Spanish woman's shoulder that she immediately shrugged off, "is educated, plays piano, speaks English. A real lady for some lucky fellow." The crowd laughed. Copper Springs had little. "Use for educated women who played piano. How much?" called a voice from the back. "For this rare jewel?" $50 would be a bargain, my friend." More laughter. $50 was a fortune in these parts. "I'll give you 5 and a bottle of whiskey," someone else offered. 10 and she can cook for my crew," added another. The Spanish woman's expression remained proud, but Lone Wolf saw how her hands trembled. Something in her eyes spoke to him, the look of someone trapped between worlds not of their choosing. Before he realized what he was doing, Lone Wolf had dismounted and approached the wagon. The crowd fell silent, parting again to let him through. "What's this?" The mustached man looked uncertain. "You looking to buy, Injun?" Lone Wolf reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden cage containing his 2 prize chickens. Rhode Island Reds he'd been raising to sell to the fort's cook. Worth perhaps $15, they represented months of careful breeding and feeding. "These," he said simply, holding up the cage. The crowd erupted in laughter. "He's offering chickens." Someone hooted. "Injun wants to trade chickens for a wife." The mustached man started to dismiss him with a wave, but then looked more carefully at the birds. "Fine specimens," he admitted, eyeing them with the practiced gaze of a man who recognized quality when he saw it. "But hardly enough for—" "Take them," the Spanish woman interrupted suddenly, her voice carrying a musical accent. "I accept his offer." Silence fell over the crowd. The mustached man sputtered. "Now see here, miss, that's not how this works." "I decide. You said we could choose," she countered, stepping forward with unexpected dignity. "I choose him." Lone Wolf stood motionless, as surprised as everyone else. The woman met his eyes directly, something few people, white or Apache, ever did. In that gaze, he read not romantic interest, but calculated desperation. She was choosing what she saw as the lesser of evils. "Well," the mustached man recovered, seeing an opportunity to save face, The lady has spoken. And who am I to deny true love? He snatched the cage from Lone Wolf's hands. Though I'd expect a dowry from the bride's family, not payment from the groom. More laughter from the crowd. Minutes later, after a mockery of a ceremony performed by the traveling salesman, Lone Wolf found himself leading his horse down the main street, the Spanish woman walking silently beside him. Behind them, catcalls and crude suggestions followed like hungry wolves. "You got yourself a real bargain, Injun." Someone shouted, "2 chickens for a Spanish filly. Hope she's worth it when the lights go out." Lone Wolf kept his eyes forward, his face impassive. Only when they reached the edge of town did he stop and turn to the woman who was now, by the loosest definition, his wife. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded, and he helped her mount behind him, feeling her hesitation before she placed her hands lightly on his waist. As they rode toward his cabin, he wondered what madness had possessed him. 2 chickens for a woman who clearly despised him. 2 chickens for a complication. He didn't need 2 chickens for a stranger who now depended on him for protection in a land that would show her no mercy, especially as the wife of an Apache scout. The sun was setting by the time they reached his cabin, casting long shadows across the sparse furnishings. The woman, he didn't even know her name, stood just inside the doorway, her eyes taking in the single room with its rough table, chair, cooking hearth, and narrow sleeping pallet. "I am Isabella Corazon," she said finally, her chin lifting slightly, "and I thank you for taking me from that situation. But understand this, I am not truly your wife. I will cook and clean in exchange for shelter, but nothing more." Lone Wolf nodded once, understanding perfectly. "I am called Lone Wolf by the whites. My Apache name is not for their tongues." He moved to the corner and gathered his blanket and spare shirt. "You sleep there," he said, indicating the pallet. "I sleep here." He pointed to the floor near the hearth. Relief visibly washed over her face, followed quickly by suspicion. "Why did you buy me if not for that?" Lone Wolf considered the question as he spread his blanket on the floor. Why indeed? The truth was, he hardly knew himself. Something in her eyes, perhaps, the recognition of a fellow outsider. "A man should not be alone always," he said finally, echoing White Dove's words. "And neither should a woman." He gestured to the pallet again. "Rest now. Tomorrow will bring its own troubles." As he lay by the dying embers of the fire, listening to the soft breathing of the stranger who was now his wife, Lone Wolf wondered what he had done. 2 prize chickens had seemed a small price to pay for companionship. But as the shadows deepened and coyotes called from the distant hills, he sensed that the true cost might prove far higher than he'd imagined. Isabella woke to unfamiliar sounds birdsong she didn't recognize, the soft crackling of a freshly built fire, the distant whinny of a horse. For a moment, disorientation gripped her. Then memory flooded back. The trading post, the jeering crowd, the quiet Apache who had purchased her with 2 chickens. She kept her eyes closed, assessing her situation as her father had taught her. Listen first, observe second, act third. The cabin smelled of wood smoke and coffee, with undertones of leather and dried herbs. No sound of her husband moving about. Perhaps he had already left. Cautiously, she opened her eyes. The cabin was empty, though the fire in the hearth had been recently tended. A crude clay cup sat on the rough-hewn table, steam rising from what she assumed was coffee. Beside it lay a piece of flat bread. Isabella rose slowly, her body stiff from the hard journey and the unyielding palate. She smoothed her wrinkled dress as best she could and touched her hair, trying to tame the wayward strands. Her valise, the only possession she'd managed to bring on her flight, sat untouched at the foot of the pallet. At least the Apache hadn't pried into her few belongings. Moving to the table, she sipped the bitter coffee gratefully. Through the cabin's single window, she could see Lone Wolf near a small corral, tending to his pinto horse. He moved with the fluid grace of a man comfortable in his own skin. Unlike the stiff-backed soldiers and swaggering cowboys she'd encountered on her journey west, her hand went instinctively to her neck, fingers seeking the familiar outline of her mother's gold locket beneath her high-collared dress. It remained safely hidden, its weight a small comfort. Inside was the only image she had of her mother, a tiny portrait painted on ivory before consumption had stolen her away when Isabella was just 7 years old. The locket was more than a keepsake. It was her last resort. If her situation became truly desperate, she could sell it, though doing so would mean sacrificing her final connection to her mother. So far, she had resisted that temptation, even during the darkest days with Vicente. The name alone sent a shiver through her body. Her husband, her real husband, according to the laws of church and state. The man she had fled across half a continent to escape. Isabella's thoughts drifted back to her father's house in Santa Fe, where she had grown up surrounded by books, music, and the refined conversation of the Spanish merchant class. Fernando Corazon had been determined that his only child would receive the education typically reserved for sons. By 16, she spoke French and English in addition to her native Spanish, played piano passably well, and could discuss literature and politics with her father's business associates. That it was at one such gathering that she'd met Vicente Aguilar, newly arrived from Mexico City with letters of introduction from influential families. Handsome, charming, and apparently wealthy, he had singled her out immediately. At 19, Isabella had been flattered by the attention of this sophisticated man. 15 years, her senior, her father, had been less impressed. "I don't trust a man whose smile never reaches his eyes," he'd warned. But when Vicente formally requested her hand 3 months later, Fernando had reluctantly agreed, unwilling to stand in the way of what appeared to be an advantageous match. The wedding had been the social event of the season. Isabella could still recall the scent of orange blossoms, the weight of her lace veil, the pride in her father's eyes as he walked her down the aisle. The day had been perfect. The marriage had been a nightmare from the first night. Vicente's charm had vanished the moment they were alone, replaced by a cold, controlling demeanor she hadn't glimpsed during their courtship. Her opinions, once solicited and seemingly valued, were now ridiculed. Her accomplishments were dismissed as frivolous. Worst of all were his rage's explosive outbursts triggered by the smallest perceived slights. The first time he'd struck her had been on their honeymoon, when she'd spent too long conversing with the hotel proprietor. "You dishonor me with your flirtations," he'd hissed, his handsome face contorted with fury. The blow had caught her completely by surprise, leaving her sprawled across their bed, tasting blood. He'd been immediately contrite, of course. They always were, according to the whispered conversations she'd later have with other wives. The apologies, the gifts, the passionate declarations of love and promises that it would never happen again. Until it did. Again and again. For 3 years, Isabella had endured, trapped by her vows and her culture's expectations. Her father had grown ill, then died, leaving her with no ally and no refuge. Vicente had quickly sold her childhood home and liquidated her father's business, consolidating his control over her life. The turning point had come 6 months ago, when she discovered she was with child. Instead of joy, she'd felt only terror. How could she bring a child into this house of fear? What kind of father would Vicente be, with his unpredictable rages and iron control? The question had become moot 2 weeks later, when, in a particularly violent outburst over a dinner she'd supposedly overcooked, Vicente had pushed her down the stairs. The pain and blood that followed told her everything. As she lay in their bed afterward, listening to Vicente, drunkenly apologizing through the locked door, something inside her had finally broken. Or perhaps, she sometimes thought, Something had finally been set free. She'd planned meticulously, secretly selling her mother's earrings to a sympathetic Jewish merchant for traveling money. When Vicente left for a 3-day business trip, she'd packed one small valise with essential items, including her mother's locket and her father's pocket watch. Then she'd fled north, using the last of her funds to join a wagon train of prospective brides bound for the Arizona Territory. The wagon master, a crude but not unkind man named Hobson, had taken her money with few questions, assuming she was a widow seeking a fresh start. Isabella had done nothing to correct this assumption. Better to be thought a widow than a runaway wife, especially since Vicente would certainly be searching for her by now, not for 6 weeks. She'd endured the hardships of the trail dust, heat, meager rations, and the increasingly unwelcome attentions of Hobson himself. When he'd announced that their first stop would be the small settlement of Copper Springs, Isabella had been relieved. Any arrangement had to be better than remaining under Hobson's watchful eye, or so she'd thought, until she found herself on display like cattle at an auction, enduring the lewd assessments of rough-looking miners and cowboys, when the Apache had appeared with his chickens, offering a transaction so absurd it had drawn laughter from the crowd. She'd made a split-second decision. Better the quiet dignity of this outsider than the pawing hands of the drunk who'd been gathering coins to purchase her. Now, standing in his sparse cabin, Isabella wondered if she'd chosen correctly. She knew nothing about this man, except that he was caught between two worlds, much like herself. Would he prove to be another Vicente, his calm demeanor masking a violent nature? Or had she finally found a safe harbor, however temporary? The cabin door opened, and Lone Wolf entered, removing his wide-brimmed hat. He nodded a greeting, but said nothing, moving to the fireplace to add another log. A silence stretched between them, not entirely uncomfortable, but heavy with unspoken questions. "Thank you for the coffee," Isabella said finally, her English careful and precise despite her accent. "You speak good English," he replied, pouring himself a cup. "My father insisted. He said it was the language of the future in these territories." She hesitated. He was a merchant in Santa Fe. Lone Wolf nodded, absorbing this information. "You are far from home." "I have no home now." The words came out more bitter than she'd intended. He studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. "Why? Were you with the bride wagon?" Isabella weighed her response carefully. How much could she safely reveal? This man was still a stranger, and her story could put them both in danger if Vicente tracked her this far. "My father died," she said finally, offering a partial truth. "I had no family, no prospects. The wagon master offered passage in exchange for ... she faltered. "For becoming a wife to whoever would pay," Lone Wolf finished for her. She nodded, grateful he didn't press further. "And you? Why would you trade valuable chickens for a stranger?" A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "My aunt says a man should not live alone. She is wise in many things." "And is she wise about bringing a Spanish woman to your home? Will your people accept this?" The smile vanished. "My people and I walk different paths now. I am scout for the Blue Coats. Apache call me the one who points the way, not a title of honor." Isabella understood immediately. A traitor to his people, just as she would be seen as a traitor to her. Marriage vows if her true situation were known. Perhaps they were more alike than she'd realized. "We have not discussed arrangements," she said carefully. "I meant what I said last night. I will cook and clean, but I did not buy a woman for that," he interrupted, his voice firm but not unkind. "I have no right to demand anything from you. We share this cabin as—" He searched for the right word. Companions. Nothing more. Relief washed through her, tempered by confusion. Then why? Lone Wolf was silent for a long moment, staring into his coffee cup as if the answer might be found there. "Because your eyes," he said finally, "they have seen too much sorrow for someone so young, like mine." He set down his cup. "I go to hunt. Now we'll bring meat for dinner." With that, he was gone, leaving Isabella to ponder his words. Had he recognized in her the same loneliness, the same sense of being adrift between worlds? And more importantly, could she trust the strange, quiet man who spoke of companionship rather than ownership? She moved to her valise and opened it, fingers searching beneath her spare dress until they found the small, hard shape wrapped in a handkerchief. Unwrapping it carefully, she revealed an ornate Spanish pistol, a parting gift from the Jewish merchant who had bought her mother's earrings. "A woman alone needs protection," he'd said gravely as he'd shown her how to load and fire it. Isabella had never fired the weapon, but its presence gave her courage. She rewrapped it carefully and returned it to its hiding place. She would watch and wait, judge this lone wolf by his actions, not his words. And if he proved false, she would be ready. The remainder of the day passed slowly as Isabella took stock of her new surroundings. The cabin, though small, was solid and weather-tight clearly, built by someone who understood the harsh realities of desert living. A small vegetable garden struggled behind the cabin, containing beans, squash, and herbs. The nearby creek provided clean water. There were worse places to find oneself by late afternoon. She had swept the dirt floor, washed the few dishes, and explored the immediate surroundings, careful not to venture too far from the cabin. The landscape was both beautiful and alien to her red rock formations in the distance, scrubby juniper trees and varieties of cactus she didn't recognize. So different from the lush mountains around Santa Fe, Lone Wolf returned at dusk, carrying a freshly dressed rabbit and a handful of wild onions. He nodded approval at the tidied cabin, but made no comment. Together, they prepared a simple stew, working in a silence that gradually became comfortable. Isabella found herself stealing glances at her unlikely husband, his precise movements, his quiet concentration, the way he moved through the world with an economy of effort that spoke of years of survival in harsh conditions. As they ate, she ventured another question. "The name they call you Lone Wolf, is that your real name?" He shook his head. "My Apache name is Nantai Bayeyes of the Warrior. The white missionary called me Joseph Williams." His mouth twisted slightly. "Neither fit now. Lone Wolf is what the cavalry captain called me when I began scouting. It has become who I am." "And how did you become a scout?" The question slipped out before she could consider its potential to offend. To her surprise, he answered readily. "My father sent me to live with missionary family when I was 12, to learn white man's ways, white man's language. When I was 17, Comanche raiders attacked a settlement. I helped track them, bring back stolen children. Army captain asked me to scout after that." He shrugged. "It was a way to live between worlds." "Do you regret it?" Isabella asked softly. "Helping the white men against other tribes?" Lone Wolf was silent for a long moment. "I track those who harm innocent people. Apache, Comanche, white, it does not matter. Wrong is wrong." He studied her face. "And you? Do you regret leaving your home to come to this wild place?" The question hit closer to her secrets than she was comfortable with. "I had my reasons," she said carefully. He nodded, accepting her evasion. "We all have our reasons. Some we share, some we keep." He rose and took their bowls to the wash basin. "Tomorrow, I show you the land around here. Places that are safe, places to avoid. You should know this if you stay." "If?" The word caught her attention. "You are not prisoner here," he said simply. "The choice to stay or go is yours, always." That night, as she lay on the pallet listening to Lone Wolf's steady breathing from his place by the hearth, Isabella touched the hidden locket at her throat and allowed herself a small measure of hope. Perhaps in this unlikely place with this unlikely man, she had found not just refuge, but the beginnings of freedom. What she couldn't know was how fragile that freedom might prove to be, or how soon her past would threaten to shatter this tentative peace. Dawn arrived with a chorus of desert birds, their calls unfamiliar to Isabella's ears. She woke to find Lone Wolf already gone, the cabin silent save for the soft popping of embers in the fireplace. A cup of coffee waited on the table beside a small loaf of bread, just as it had the previous morning. The gesture, simple as it was, offered a strange comfort. She ate quickly, then set about establishing some order in her new surroundings. The cabin, while solidly built, lacked the basic amenities she had taken for granted even in her reduced circumstances with Vicente. No proper shelves for storage, clothes hung on pegs rather than stored in a wardrobe, cooking utensils piled haphazardly near the hearth rather than organized by purpose. A bachelor's home, she thought, or more accurately, the home of a man who viewed shelter as merely a place to sleep between journeys. It spoke of impermanence, of a life lived on the edges of civilization, not by mid-morning. Isabella had swept the packed earth floor, organized the cooking area, and was contemplating how to create more storage space when the cabin door swung open. Lone Wolf entered carrying an armful of freshly cut pine boards, the scent of sap filling the small space. "For shelves," he said simply, noting her surprise. "Saw you looking at walls yesterday." Isabella felt a flush of embarrassment that he had so easily read her thoughts. "You didn't have to. Cabin needs woman's touch." He set the boards against the wall. "We'll build after I show you the land." Outside, the October sun cast long shadows across the small clearing where the cabin stood. Lone Wolf pointed toward the creek that ran 50 yards to the east. "Water good here. Follow upstream for better fishing. Downstream leads to Copper Springs, not safe for you to go alone." Isabella nodded, understanding the implied warning. A Spanish woman married to an Apache would find little welcome in a frontier town. North Ridge has good plants for medicine. He gestured toward a rocky outcropping. "We'll show you which ones later. South and west belong to Rancher Collins. His. Cowboys shoot first, ask questions after. Stay clear of his fences." For the next hour, they walked the boundaries of what Isabella came to understand was a small but carefully chosen parcel of land. Good water, decent grazing for a few animals, sheltered from the worst of the desert winds, yet strategically positioned to see approaching riders from all directions. "How did you come to own this place?" she asked as they rested beneath a gnarled juniper tree. "Don't own," Lone Wolf replied. "Government land. I build here because Captain says I need fixed place to find me." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Apache don't own land. Land owns us." The concept was foreign to Isabella, raised with the Spanish obsession with property and boundaries. "But your garden, your cabin, surely, those are yours?" He shrugged. "For now, until blue coats or settlers decide they want it." "Then—" His gesture eloquently conveyed the impermanence of their situation. The realization sent a chill through Isabella despite the warm morning. She had fled from one precarious position only to land in another. Her security here was as fragile as the desert wildflowers that bloomed briefly after rain, then vanished. "You look troubled," Lone Wolf observed. "I'm beginning to understand why you accepted my presence so easily," she replied. "Your life here is as uncertain as mine." His dark eyes studied her face. "All life is uncertain. Apache know this. White people try to forget with their deeds and fences." When they returned to the cabin, Lone Wolf set about installing the shelves he'd promised. Isabella watched with interest as he worked, his movements precise and economical. He used simple tools, a handmade saw, a stone hammer, wooden pegs instead of nails, yet the resulting shelves were sturdy and level. "You have skilled hands," she observed when he'd finished. Missionary taught carpentry. Side Jesus was carpenter. He ran a hand over the smooth pine. I liked making things that last. Something in his tone suggested he'd made precious few things. In his life that had endured, Isabella began arranging their meager supplies on the new shelves, creating a semblance of order that pleased her sense of propriety. As she worked, she became aware of Lone Wolf watching her, his expression thoughtful. "What is it?" she asked. "You bring life to this place," he said simply, then turned away to tend the fire. The words settled over her like a warm blanket. When was the last time someone had valued her presence rather than merely her obedience or appearance? Certainly not Vicente, who had seen her as a possession to be controlled. Not even her father in his later years, too consumed by illness to notice. Her unhappiness dot as the sun began its descent. Isabella took stock of their food supplies. "We need more than rabbit and bread," she declared. "Do you have flour? Salt? Any vegetables besides those few beans in the garden?" Lone Wolf looked faintly amused. "Some flour, salt, dried corn, few potatoes." He gestured to a small barrel in the corner she hadn't thoroughly explored. "Need to hunt more before winter." Isabella rolled up her sleeves. "Then we shall have a proper meal tonight. Do you have any wooden spoons?" "I can only find this metal one, and it's too large for proper cooking." He shook his head. "Never needed. More than one." "Well, we need more now," she said firmly, then caught herself. "That is, if I'm to cook properly." Without a word, Lone Wolf retrieved a small knife from his belt and selected a piece of pine left over from the shelving. As Isabella prepared a stew with their limited ingredients, he sat by the door, whittling with practiced ease. The steady shush-shush of blade against wood created a soothing rhythm as the cabin filled with the aroma of cooking food dot by the time. The stew was ready. Lone Wolf had produced a perfectly shaped wooden spoon, its handle smooth and comfortable in Isabella's hand. She accepted it with genuine appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said, running her fingers over the simple but elegant implement. "Thank you." He nodded, a flicker of pleasure crossing his normally impassive features. "First gift to my ... to you." The awkward correction hung between them. What were they to each other? Not truly husband and wife, yet bound together by circumstance and a strange ceremony neither had expected to take seriously. Companions, he had called them. Perhaps that was enough for now. They ate in companionable silence. The stew a vast improvement over previous meals, despite the limited ingredients. Afterward, Isabella showed Lone Wolf how she had reorganized their supplies. "Winter coming," he observed. "Need more food. Tomorrow I hunt, maybe trade at fort for coffee, flour." "Could I accompany you?" Isabella asked. "To the fort, I mean." "I should know how to get there if—" She trailed off, unsure how to express her concern about being left alone for extended periods. Lone Wolf considered this. "Fort safer than town. Captain knows me, but journey not easy." "I'm stronger than I look," she assured him, "and I need to learn these lands if I'm to stay." Her words clearly pleased him, though he merely nodded. "We leave at dawn." That night, as they prepared for sleep in their now familiar arrangement, Isabella on the pallet, Lone Wolf on his blanket near the hearth, a sound outside the cabin brought them both alert. Hoofbeats approaching slowly. Lone Wolf moved silently. To the window, knife in hand. "Rider," he whispered, "one man." Isabella's heart raced. Had Vicente somehow tracked her here? But no, that was impossible. Even with his resources and connections, he couldn't have followed her trail across hundreds of miles of wilderness. A sharp knock at the door made her jump. Lone Wolf motioned for her to stay back as he opened it just enough to see their late visitor, Evening Injun. A harsh voice carried clearly through the cabin. "Sheriff Blackwood here. Heard you got yourself a woman from that bride wagon." Lone Wolf said nothing, but opened the door wider, allowing the sheriff to see Isabella. Standing by the table, the lawman was tall and raw-boned, with a drooping mustache and cold eyes that assessed Isabella with unconcealed interest. "Well now, she's a sight better than what I expected. Spanish, ain't she? Too good for an Injun by half." Isabella lifted her chin, meeting his gaze steadily despite her racing heart. "What you want, Sheriff?" Lone Wolf's voice was neutral, giving away nothing. "Just checking that everything's single quotes S. proper." The sheriff spat a stream of tobacco juice onto the ground outside. "Town's got standards to maintain. Can't have women being mistreated, even if they're foolish enough to marry an Injun." The hypocrisy of his concern wasn't lost on Isabella, who had seen how the women in the bride wagon were displayed like cattle at auction. "I am perfectly well, Sheriff," she said in her most dignified tone. "My husband has been most considerate." The word husband felt strange on her tongue, but she understood instinctively that showing a united front was essential. The sheriff's eyes narrowed. "That so? Well then, I'll just remind you both of a few things. First, we don't cotton to mixed marriages in these parts. You keep to yourselves and stay out of town unless absolutely necessary. Second, he fixed Lone Wolf with a hard stare. You keep that woman in line. Any complaints, any trouble, and I'll be back with deputies. Understood?" Lone Wolf nodded once, his face expressionless. "Good. And one more thing. Captain Thornton wants you at the fort day after tomorrow. Some Comanche sign been spotted near the stage road." With that, the sheriff turned and mounted his horse. "I'll be watching you two," he called over his shoulder as he rode away. Lone Wolf closed the door and secured the simple wooden latch. His shoulders sagged slightly, the only indication of the tension he'd been holding. "He is not a good man," Isabella observed quietly. "Most aren't out here." Lone Wolf moved to check that the shutters were secure. Sheriff takes money from Rancher Collins. Wants all Indians gone from territory. And this Captain Thornton? Can he be trusted? Lone Wolf considered the question. "He is fair man, treats me with respect, but he is blue coat first. Would follow orders even if orders wrong." Isabella absorbed this information, adding it to her mental map of potential allies and enemies in this strange new world. The sheriff's visit changes things. "We should not go to the fort together tomorrow." "No," Lone Wolf agreed. "Too risky now." "I go alone." He studied her face. "You afraid to stay here?" She thought about it honestly. "Not afraid, but I will be. Careful, and I will have something ready for your return." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. 2 days only. Then we decide next steps." The phrase caught Isabella's attention. Next steps? Sheriff's visit means trouble coming. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but coming. He settled back onto his blanket. "Sleep now. Morning comes early." As she lay in the darkness, Isabella found herself both disturbed and oddly comforted by Lone Wolf's assessment. Trouble was indeed coming, it always did. But for the first time since fleeing Santa Fe, she wasn't facing it entirely alone. The realization brought with it another, more startling thought. In just 2 days, this sparse cabin with its silent Apache inhabitant had begun to feel more like home than Vicenti's grand house ever had. Not because of any physical comfort, but because here, in this unlikely place, she was treated with a basic respect she had almost forgotten was possible. Dawn came too quickly. Isabella woke to find Lone Wolf already dressed for travel, his saddlebags packed with items to trade at the fort. He handed her a cup of coffee as usual, but this morning he also presented her with another gift, a small knife in a leather sheath. "For protection," he said simply. "Keep close always." Isabella accepted it gravely, understanding the significance of the gesture. "I will be careful, and I will be here when you return." Something flickered in his dark eyes, relief, perhaps, or gratitude. He nodded once, then was gone, the sound of his horse's hooves fading into the morning stillness. Alone for the first time since her arrival, Isabella took stock of her situation. The cabin felt emptier without Lone Wolf's quiet presence, but also offered a chance to fully explore her surroundings without feeling self-conscious. She examined the new knife, small but razor-sharp, perfectly balanced for her hand. A practical gift, yet somehow more meaningful than the expensive but useless trinkets Vicente had bestowed to make amends after his rages. The day passed slowly as Isabella busied herself with domestic tasks. She ventured to the creek for water, watching carefully for any sign of unwelcome visitors. She gathered some of the wild onions Lone Wolf had shown her and added them to their dwindling vegetable garden. She even attempted to repair a torn seam in her dress, though her needlework had never been her strongest skill. As evening approached, she found herself listening for hoofbeats, though she knew Lone Wolf wouldn't return until the following day. The solitude, which she had sometimes craved during her marriage to Vicente, now felt oppressive. Strange how quickly she had grown accustomed to the Apache's company. Night fell, bringing with it unfamiliar sounds that kept Isabella on edge. Coyotes howled in the distance. Something scratched at the cabin roof, a branch or some small animal. She couldn't tell. The fire burned low, casting weird shadows across the walls. She added another log, taking comfort in the simple task. Sleep came fitfully, interrupted by vivid dreams of Vicente finding her, of being dragged back to Santa Fe in chains. In one particularly disturbing fragment, she saw Lone Wolf lying dead, her husband standing over him with a smoking pistol. She woke gasping, heart pounding, to find the cabin still empty and dawn breaking through the shutters. The second day alone passed much like the first, though Isabella ventured a little farther from the cabin, familiarizing herself with the immediate surroundings. She found a small stand of prickly pear cactus and carefully harvested some of the fruits, remembering how her father's cook had prepared them years ago in Santa Fe. By late afternoon, she had prepared a simple but more varied meal than their usual fare, hoping Lone Wolf would return hungry from his journey. When hoofbeats finally approached the cabin at dusk, relief washed over her, followed immediately by caution. She took up position beside the door, Lone Wolf's gift knife in hand, waiting to confirm the rider's identity before revealing herself. "Isabella?" His voice, normally so measured, carried a note of concern. "Here," she called, setting aside the knife and opening the door. Lone Wolf dismounted, his expression relaxing slightly when he saw her. "All well?" She nodded. "Quiet. No visitors." "And you? Was your journey successful?" He patted one of the bulging saddlebags. "Coffee, flour, salt, even sugar." A hint of pride colored his voice. Captain paid well for tracking Comanche. Said too, "Return in 1 week." Together they unloaded his horse and brought the supplies inside. Isabella was pleased to note real coffee beans rather than the harsh substitute they'd been using. Enough flour to last a month, and even a small pouch of dried apples, a luxury she hadn't tasted since leaving Santa Fe. "I made food," she said, gesturing to the pot keeping warm by the fire. "It's not much, but smells good." Lone Wolf settled at the table, removing his hat. "Cabin feels different now." "Different?" "Like someone waiting here matters." He accepted the bowl she offered with a nod of thanks. "Makes returning easier." A simple observation caught Isabella off guard. How long had it been since her presence had mattered to anyone? Vicente had viewed her as a possession, not a person whose absence would leave a void. Yet here was this near stranger, this man from a completely different world than her own, expressing appreciation for simply finding her there when he returned. As they ate, Lone Wolf shared news from the Fork rumors of increased Comanche activity to the north. Talk of new settlers arriving before winter, Gossip about a gold strike that would likely prove false, like all the others. Isabella listened attentively, hungry for information about the world beyond their isolated cabin. And the town? She asked. Did you hear any news of the bride wagon or the man who sold me? Wagon left day after trading post. Headed north to mining camps. He hesitated. Sheriff asked questions about you at fort. Wanted to know where you came from. A chill ran through Isabella. What did you tell him? Nothing. Not his business. Lone Wolf's expression darkened. But he watches too close. Not good, do you think? He suspects something about me? Maybe, or maybe just doesn't like Apache with Spanish wife. He studied her face. Is there reason for him to suspect? Isabella looked away, debating how much to reveal. Lone Wolf had been nothing but honorable. With her, but her secret could put him in danger. Yet if that danger was coming regardless, didn't he deserve to know why? There might be, she admitted finally. My situation in Santa Fe was ... complicated. I left for good reasons. To her surprise, he simply nodded. Everyone has secrets. When? You ready to share, I listen. Until then, we be careful. His acceptance, without pressing for details she wasn't ready to provide, loosened something tight in Isabella's chest. This strange, quiet man seemed to understand boundaries in a way Vicente never had. Later, as they prepared for sleep in their usual arrangement, Isabella found herself watching Lone Wolf as he banked the fire for the night. His movements were graceful despite his muscular build, his profile noble in the fading firelight. Not handsome in the conventional way Vicente had been, but compelling in his quiet strength and dignity. Lone Wolf, she said impulsively, thank you for the knife and for respecting my privacy. He looked up, something unreadable passing through his dark eyes. We all have pasts. Some follow us like shadows. But here, now, we make new path. He settled onto his blanket. Rest well, Isabella. And you, she replied softly, turning to face the wall. Outside, a coyote called into the night, its lonely cry, echoing across the desert. But inside the small cabin, two solitary souls had begun to forge a connection neither had expected, a fragile bridge between their separate worlds that just might offer passage to somewhere new. A week passed, in relative peace. Each day brought small adjustments as Isabella and Lone Wolf established an unspoken rhythm to their shared existence. Mornings began with coffee that Lone Wolf prepared before dawn. Days filled with practical tasks Isabella tending the expanded garden and organizing their supplies, Lone Wolf hunting or making repairs to the cabin and corral. Evenings spent in quiet conversation or comfortable silence as they ate together beside the fire. It was a simple life, austere by the standards Isabella had known in Santa Fe, yet she found an unexpected contentment in its routines. Here, unlike in Vicente's grand house, she had purpose and agency. Her opinions were heard, her efforts appreciated. The constant fear that had been her companion for 3 years had begun to recede, like morning mist burned away by desert sun. We need supplies, Lone Wolf announced one morning as they finished breakfast. Flour low, coffee almost gone. Isabella nodded, having noted the same herself. Will you go to the fort again? Too soon. Captain expects me next week. He considered for a moment. Must try trading post in town. A flutter of apprehension stirred in Isabella's chest. Is that wise? After the sheriff's warning. Need supplies, he repeated simply. Winter coming. Jackson fair man, good prices. He studied her face. You stay here. Safer. No. The word came quickly, surprising them both. If we're to be seen as married ... we should appear together sometimes. Hiding me away will only fuel suspicion. Lone Wolf frowned. Town not safe for you, nor for you, she countered. but less dangerous if we face it together. When he still looked unconvinced, she added, "Besides, I need fabric. This dress won't last the winter." He considered this practical point, then nodded once. "We go together, but stay close to me. Some men in town—" He didn't finish the thought, but he didn't need to. Isabella well understood the dangers a woman faced in frontier settlements, especially one in her unusual position. They set out mid-morning, Isabella, wearing her best and only dress, her hair neatly pinned beneath a simple bonnet she'd fashioned from scraps. Lone Wolf rode his pinto, with Isabella seated behind him, her arms loosely circling his waist. The arrangement was uncomfortably intimate, yet necessary, given their single horse. The ride to Copper Springs took nearly an hour, giving Isabella ample time to contemplate the strangeness of her situation. Not 3 weeks ago, she had arrived here a desperate fugitive, willing to accept any arrangement that offered escape from Hobson's increasingly insistent advances. Now she was returning as the wife, in name if not of an Apache scout, heading into a town where both of them would be viewed with suspicion at best, hostility at worst. As they approached the outskirts of Copper Springs, Lone Wolf spoke. Over his shoulder, "Let me do trading. You stay close. If Copper Springs," Lone Wolf spoke. Over his shoulder, "Let me do trading. You stay close. If trouble starts, we leave immediately." "I understand," she replied, her apprehension growing as the town's scattered buildings came into view. Copper Springs looked much as it had when she'd first seen it, a dusty main street lined with false-fronted buildings, most in need of paint and repair. A few horses were hitched outside the saloon, despite the early hour. 2 women in faded dresses hurried along the boardwalk, baskets in hand. A mangy dog barked half-heartedly as they passed. Eyes tracked their progress as Lone Wolf guided the pinto toward Jackson's trading post. Isabella felt the weight of those stares, some curious, others openly hostile. She sat straighter, chin lifted in defiance of their judgment. Lone Wolf tied the horse at the hitching rail, then helped Isabella dismount, his hands strong and sure at her waist. The brief contact was steadying, reminding her that whatever came, she wasn't facing it alone. The interior of the trading post was cool and dim after the bright sunlight. Shelves lined the walls, stocked with everything from ammunition to fabric, from coffee beans to cast iron cookware. The familiar smells of leather, tobacco, and coffee beans mingled in the air. Amos Jackson looked up from his ledger recognition, and surprise crossing his round face. "Lone Wolf, didn't expect to see you so soon." His gaze shifted to Isabella, curiosity evident. "Ma'am." "Need supplies," Lone Wolf said simply, placing a small pouch of coins on the counter. "Coffee, flour, salt," he glanced at Isabella, "and fabric." Jackson nodded, moving efficiently to gather the requested items. "Heard you 2 got hitched." Quite the talk of the town, that was. His tone was neutral, but his eyes were shrewd as they assessed Isabella. "Spanish, ain't you? From Santa Fe way?" "Yes," Isabella replied cautiously. "My father was a merchant there." "Merchant's daughter." Jackson whistled softly. "Long way from home." Isabella met his gaze steadily. "This is my home now." Something that might have been approval flickered in the trader's eyes before he turned back to his task. As he measured coffee beans into a paper sack, the door opened behind them, admitting 3 cowboys. Isabella sensed Lone Wolf tensing beside her. "Well, look at what we got here," drawled a familiar voice. The Injun and his Mexican bride. Isabella turned to see the same tall cowboy who had confronted Lone Wolf during his previous visit Harlow. If she remembered correctly, his companions were cut from the same rough cloth, unshaven, trail dusty, with the hard eyes of men who viewed violence as entertainment. "Just finishing our business," Lone Wolf said evenly. "Then we go." "Now hold on." Harlow stepped closer, tobacco-stained teeth showing in what might generously be called a smile. "That ain't neighborly. We ain't been properly introduced to your Mrs." He tipped his hat with exaggerated courtesy. "Mom, Bill Harlow, foreman at the Collins Ranch. These here are Pete and Dooley." Isabella nodded stiffly, but said nothing, her hand instinctively moving to the small knife concealed in the pocket of her dress. "Cat got your tongue, pretty lady?" Harlow pressed, moving even closer. "Or maybe your Injun husband don't let you talk to real men." "My husband doesn't dictate who I speak to," Isabella replied coldly. "I simply choose not to engage with those who lack basic manners." A dangerous silence followed her words. Jackson froze in the act of measuring flour, his expression alarmed. Then Harlow laughed, an ugly sound devoid of humor. "Listen to that, boys. Injun got himself an educated squaw." He leaned in, his breath sour with whiskey, despite the early hour. "Tell me, Spanish lady, how's it feel laying down with a savage? Does he grunt like an animal when he—" "That's enough, Harlow." Jackson's voice cut through the tension. "I don't allow that kind of talk in my store. Take it elsewhere." "Or what? Old man?" Harlow sneered, but he stepped back slightly. "Just making conversation with the lady." Isabella felt Lone Wolf's hand at her elbow, a gentle pressure guiding her toward the door. "We go now," he murmured. "Running away, Injun?" taunted the cowboy called Pete. "Yellow-bellied like the rest of your kind." Lone Wolf ignored the provocation, his focus solely on getting Isabella safely outside. They had almost reached the door when Harlow stepped deliberately into their path. "Hold up there. You still owe me for that card game last month." The blatant lie hung in the air like smoke. "Never played cards with you?" Lone Wolf replied evenly. "Calling me a liar, Injun?" Harlow's hand drifted toward the pistol at his hip. "That's dangerous talk." Isabella had seen this scenario before Vicente deliberately provoking confrontations, manufacturing grievances as an excuse for violence. She recognized the gleam in Harlow's eyes, the anticipation of causing pain. "My husband speaks the truth," she said clearly, stepping slightly forward. "And we have no quarrel with you, Mr. Harlow. Please let us pass." "Well now, the lady vouches for you." Harlow's grin widened. "But see, I got a problem with Injuns who forget their place, and with white women who lower themselves to—" "I am not white, Mr. Harlow. I am Spanish," Isabella interrupted, her patience evaporating. "And my ancestry is not your concern, nor is my marriage. Now, will you move aside? Or must we call for the sheriff?" The mention of the sheriff caused a flicker of hesitation in Harlow's expression. For a moment, Isabella thought they might defuse the situation. Then Dooley, the third cowboy who had remained silent until now, spat on the floor. "Sheriff wouldn't side with no Injun over white men. Everyone knows that, and everyone knows Collins pays Blackwood to look the other way," added Pete with a smirk. Jackson moved from behind the counter, his normally placid face set in determined lines. "That's it. All of you, out of my store. Now, before I get my shotgun." Harlow raised his hands in mock surrender. "Easy, Jackson. We're going." He fixed Lone Wolf with a cold stare. "But this ain't over, Scout. Not by a long shot." As the cowboys moved toward the door, Harlow deliberately bumped against Isabella, hard enough to send her stumbling against a display of fabric bolts. The carefully arranged textiles toppled, and Isabella caught herself on the edge of a shelf, the rough wood tearing her sleeve from shoulder to elbow. "Clumsy Mexican," Harlow sneered. "Watch where you're standing." Isabella straightened, holding the torn edges of her dress together with as much dignity as she could muster. She saw the flash of anger in Lone Wolf's eyes, the barely contained impulse to retaliate. His restraint in that moment spoke volumes about his character and his understanding of their precarious position. The cowboys swaggered out. leaving a wake of tension thick enough to cut with a knife. "I'm sorry about that, Mom," Jackson said, helping to right the fallen fabric bolts. "Those Collins boys are trouble, but they spend good money here. Can't afford to turn them away entirely." "We understand," Isabella said, though her heart still raced from the confrontation. "Here," Jackson called to a woman emerging from the back room. "Martha, help the lady with her dress." Martha Jackson was a thin, careworn woman with kind eyes that had seen too much hardship to judge others easily. She guided Isabella to a small side room while Lone Wolf finished their transaction with Amos. "Let me see that tear," she said, examining the damaged sleeve. "Got a sewing kit right here. Won't take but a minute to mend." "Thank you," Isabella said, touched by the unexpected kindness. "You're very generous." Martha worked quickly, her needle flashing in the dim light. "Not generous, just decent." She glanced toward the main room where her husband and Lone Wolf could be heard conversing in low tones. "It ain't easy, what you two are doing, living between worlds like that." "No," Isabella agreed. "It isn't. My sister married a Cherokee man back in Tennessee. Good man, hard worker." Martha tied off her thread and bit the end. They had to leave in the night when neighbors started talking about running them out. Ended up in Oklahoma territory. Isabella understood the message beneath the anecdote. "You think we should leave?" Martha handed back the mended dress. "I think people fear what they don't understand, and fear makes them dangerous." She patted Isabella's hand. "You seem a sensible woman. And that Apache of yours, he's got a good reputation with those that matter. Just be careful." "We will," Isabella promised, feeling a surprising connection to this frontier woman she'd just met. When they rejoined the men, Lone Wolf had already packed their supplies and was waiting by the door, his posture alert for any sign of the cowboy's return. Jackson handed Isabella a small paper-wrapped package. "Calico," he explained. "Blue would suit you. Martha's idea." "Thank you," Isabella said, genuinely moved by the unexpected gift. "Both of you." Outside, the street was mercifully empty of Harlow and his companions. Lone Wolf quickly helped Isabella mount, then swung up behind her, reversing their earlier arrangement so that he could shield her with his body if necessary. They rode in tense silence until Copper Springs was well behind them. Only then did Lone Wolf speak. "You should not have confronted cowboys," he said, though his tone held more concern than censure. "Dangerous men. They meant to provoke you," Isabella replied, "to create an excuse for violence. I've seen such tactics before." He was quiet for a moment, absorbing her words. "You handled yourself well. Brave woman." The simple compliment warmed her more than it should have. The Jacksons were surprisingly kind. "Good people in bad place," Lone Wolf agreed. "Store caught between ranchers and miners. Need business from all sides." Isabella thought about Martha Jackson's warning, delivered with genuine concern. "Do you think we should leave? Find somewhere else?" Lone Wolf considered the question as the Pinto picked its way along the rocky trail. "Where would we go?" "All territories, same for Apache and Spanish woman together. Maybe worse." The truth of his assessment settled heavily between them. There was no promised land where their unusual partnership would find easy acceptance. They could run, but the same prejudices would follow. "Then we stay," Isabella said with more confidence than she felt. "And we face whatever comes." She felt rather than saw his nod of agreement. "Together," he added, the word carrying a weight. Neither of them had anticipated when their strange arrangement began. As they approached the cabin, Isabella found herself drawing comfort from its rough-hewn walls and smoking chimney. It wasn't much a single room on contested land, but in just a few weeks it had become a sanctuary of sorts. The only place where they could simply be themselves, without the judging eyes of two cultures that viewed their union with suspicion. That night, as Lone Wolf tended the fire and Isabella prepared a simple meal with their new supplies, the events at the trading post hung between them, demanding discussion. Those men, Isabella began carefully. The ones from the Collins Ranch. Will they cause more trouble? Lone Wolf looked up from the flames, his face grave in the flickering light. Yes, not today, not tomorrow, but someday. He added another log to the fire. Harlow has reputation. Bad man who enjoys hurting others. Like the tear in my dress, Isabella mused. Deliberate, meant to provoke you. If I fought him, sheriff would jail me. Or worse, his expression darkened. Apache, raising. Hand against white man always ends same way. Isabella moved to sit beside him, close but not touching. You showed great restraint. It couldn't have been easy. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Learned restraint young. Missionary beat boys who showed anger. The casual mention of such cruelty sent a chill through Isabella, though Lone Wolf spoke without self-pity. Later, as scout, learned more. Survival skill. For both of us, it seems, Isabella said softly, thinking of the countless times she had swallowed her rage at Vicenti's treatment, knowing protest would only bring worse punishment. Lone Wolf studied her face in the firelight. You have known bad men before. It wasn't a question, but Isabella answered anyway. Yes. He nodded, asking nothing more, respecting the boundaries of her past. But something in his silence gave Isabella the courage to continue. My husband in Santa Fe. He was not a kind man. The admission, simple as it was, lifted a small weight from her shoulders. That is why I left. Lone Wolf absorbed this information, his expression unchanging. He searched for you? The question cut to the heart of her fears. Possibly. He is a proud man. Being left would damage his reputation. You safe here, Lone Wolf said with quiet certainty. No one take you back if you don't wish to go. The promise was made simply, without dramatics, yet Isabella found herself believing it completely. This quiet man with his restrained strength had offered her something. Vicente, with all his wealth and connections, never had the freedom to choose her own path. Thank you, she said, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. They ate there. Meal in companionable silence, the day's tensions gradually easing. Later, as they prepared for sleep in their usual arrangement, Isabella found herself watching Lone Wolf as he carefully checked the cabin's door and shutters, a new precaution since the trading post incident. Lone Wolf, she said impulsively. I'm glad I chose you that day, with the chickens. He paused, something unreadable passing through his dark eyes. 2 chickens, he said finally, a hint of humor in his voice. Best trade I ever made. As Isabella drifted toward sleep that night, the torn sleeve of her dress carefully mended on its peg, she realized how much had changed in such a short time. She had arrived a desperate fugitive, willing to accept any arrangement that offered escape. Now she found herself genuinely grateful for the quiet partnership they were building, a fragile bridge between their separate worlds that offered something. Neither had expected to find again. Belonging. The scream tore through the night, jolting Lone Wolf from sleep to instant alertness. His hand closed around his knife before his eyes had fully opened, body responding to potential threat with practiced efficiency. It took him a moment to locate the source, Isabella thrashing on her pallet, eyes still closed, trapped in some private terror. No, please, no. Her voice was raw with fear, her arms raised defensively against an assailant only she could see. Isabella. Lone Wolf kept his distance, knowing better than to touch someone caught in a nightmare. Wake now. You dream only. She continued to struggle against invisible bonds, Spanish words spilling from her lips in desperate pleas. Sweat gleamed on her forehead in the dying firelight, her face contorted in an expression Lone Wolf recognized all too well. the look of prey cornered by a predator. "Isabella," he repeated, louder this time. "You safe here. No one hurt you." Her eyes flew open, wild and unseeing at first, then gradually focusing on his face. For one heartbreaking moment, naked terror flashed across her features at the sight of him. Then recognition dawned, and she sagged back onto the pallet, trembling violently. "Water?" Lone Wolf offered, keeping his movements slow and deliberate. As he filled a cup from the nearby bucket, she nodded, pushing herself to a sitting position and accepting the cup with shaking hands. Water sloshed over the rim as she brought it to her lips. "I'm sorry," she whispered after drinking. "I didn't mean to wake you. No apology needed?" Lone Wolf moved to add wood to the nearly dead fire, giving her space to compose herself. "Bad? Dreams come to all sometimes." The flames caught, casting dancing shadows across the cabin walls. In their flickering light, Isabella looked vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed during waking hours. Her carefully maintained dignity had been stripped away, revealing the wounded soul beneath. "Would you like to speak of it?" Lone Wolf asked. Settling cross-legged near the fire, far enough away to avoid crowding her Dot, Isabella shook her head, then reconsidered. "It was Dot, my husband, Vicente." She wrapped her arms around herself, as if suddenly cold, despite the freshly stoked fire. "He found me, found us. He was hurting you because you had protected me." The simple explanation revealed more than she perhaps intended. Lone Wolf nodded, understanding the deeper fear, not just for herself, but for anyone who might stand between her and her former husband's wrath. "This Vicente," he said carefully. "He hurt you often?" Isabella's gaze fixed on the flames. "Yes," she answered, the single word carrying years of pain. Lone Wolf absorbed this confirmation of what he had already suspected. "You ran from him." "I had to." Her voice strengthened with conviction. "After I lost the baby," she stopped abruptly, perhaps having revealed more than she intended. Lone Wolf felt a surge of anger toward this unknown man who had driven such a proud woman to desperate flight. Among the Apache, a man who beat his wife would face the judgment of her male relatives. Clearly, Isabella had enjoyed no such protection. "You were right to leave," he said simply. "No one owns another person." She looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Many would disagree. The law gives a husband rights over his wife. "White man's law," Lone Wolf replied with a slight shrug. "Not natural law, not Creator's law." His gaze drifted to the small medicine bundle hanging from a peg near his sleeping place, a package of sacred herbs, stones and personal items wrapped in buckskin and decorated with beadwork. He rarely acknowledged its presence, especially in front of others, having learned early in his life among white people that such spiritual items were often mocked or even confiscated by missionaries. Intent on saving native children from their pagan beliefs, Isabella followed his gaze. "What is that?" she asked, curiosity momentarily displacing the shadows of her nightmare. Lone Wolf hesitated. White missionaries had taught that Apache spiritual ways were evil superstition. This Spanish woman had surely been raised in the Catholic faith, with its intolerance for pagan practices. Yet something in her expression showed genuine interest rather than judgment. "Medicine bundle," he answered finally. "Sacred items for protection and guidance, made by my mother before she died." To his surprise, Isabella showed no sign of the revulsion or fear he had come to expect from Christians when confronted with native spiritual practices. Instead, she leaned forward slightly, her expression thoughtful. "It's important to you," she observed. "Yes." He rose and carefully lifted the bundle from its peg, returning to sit by the fire. After a moment's consideration, he unwrapped the outer layer of buckskin to reveal the contents: a small pouch of tobacco, an eagle feather several stones with natural holes through their centers, and a beautifully beaded leather bag containing herbs. My people believe all things have spirit, he explained, watching her reaction carefully. Stones, plants, animals, mountains. Medicine bundle connects person to these spirits, asks for their help and protection. Isabella studied the sacred, objects with respectful interest. It's not so different from Catholic saints and relics, she mused. My father had a medal of St. Christopher he always carried for protection when traveling. The comparison startled Lone Wolf. No white person had ever drawn such a parallel before. You not think it ... evil? He asked cautiously. A small, sad smile touched her lips. I've seen true evil, Lone Wolf. It doesn't reside in sacred objects or different ways of prayer. Her gaze returned to the flames. It lives in the hearts of those who harm others for pleasure or power. Her words resonated with a truth Lone Wolf had felt, but never heard articulated so clearly. He rewrapped the medicine bundle with care. Your mother made this? Isabella asked. Yes, when I was 10 summers, before sickness took her. He returned the bundle to its place of honor. She was medicine woman, knew old ways, old songs. You must miss her very much. The simple observation, offered with genuine empathy, loosened something tight in Lone Wolf's chest. No one had spoken of his mother in many years. The missionaries had forbidden mention of his heathen family, and later, as a scout, he had learned to keep his personal history to himself. Yes, he acknowledged, she was kind woman, strong spirit. He settled back by the fire. She would have liked you. The comment clearly surprised Isabella. Why do you say that? She valued courage, honesty, respect for others' ways. He poked at the fire with a stick, sending sparks upward. You have these things. Isabella looked down, a flush coloring her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire's heat. I don't feel particularly courageous. Running away seems the opposite of bravery. No, Lone Wolf said firmly. Takes courage to leave what is known, even if painful, for what is unknown. Many stay in bad situations because fear of change greater than fear of suffering. They sat in companionable silence for a time, each lost in private thoughts. The fire crackled and popped, its warmth creating a small circle of comfort in the vast, dark wilderness surrounding their cabin. Tell me about your people, Isabella said finally. If you wish to, that is. I know so little about the Apache ways. The request surprised Lone Wolf. Few white people or Spanish, for that matter, showed genuine interest in Apache culture beyond lurid tales of savage warfare. But Isabella's expression held nothing but sincere curiosity. What would you know? He asked. Everything, she replied simply. Your childhood, your traditions, how you see the world. If we're to share this life, even temporarily, I should understand your perspective. Her reasoning made sense, yet Lone Wolf found himself hesitating. So much of his heritage had been buried deep, forced underground by years in the missionary school and later by the practical necessities of survival in the white man's world. Could he even access those memories now, after so long? I was born in mountains to east, he began slowly, the words feeling strange on his tongue. My band, Tanto Apache, moved with seasons. Spring in lowlands for new plants, summer in high country for cooler hunting. Fall gathering acorns, pine nuts, winter in protected valleys. As he spoke, the rhythms of his childhood returned, the seasonal migrations, the communal hunts, the ceremonies marking life's passages. He described his father, a respected warrior known for his wisdom and counsel, as well as his skill in battle. His mother, who gathered healing plants and taught him their uses. His training as a boy, learning to move silently through forest, to read tracks of animals and men, to endure hunger and thirst without complaint. Boys became men through ceremony, he explained. 4 days alone, no food, little water. Vision. Quest to find life's direction. I was 12 when time came for my test. Did you complete it? Isabella asked, fully engaged in his story. A shadow crossed his face. No. Week before ceremony, soldiers came. Said all Apache children must attend school. Learn to be civilized. The bitterness in the last word was palpable. My father argued. Captain threatened to arrest all men. Burn camp. Finally, agreement. Made one child from each family would go. And your father chose you, Isabella said softly. Lone Wolf nodded. I was only son. Strong, quick to learn. Father believed I could survive in white world, bring useful knowledge back to our people. His expression grew distant. Last thing he told me, remember who you are. Apache blood flows in your veins. This cannot be washed away. Wise words. Isabella murmured. Did you see him again? Once, 5 years later. Brief visit allowed by missionary. Father looked ... old. Tired. Lone Wolf stared into the flames. Many had died from white man's diseases. Band forced to smaller territory. Game growing scarce. He paused, the weight of memory pressing down. He asked if I still remembered Apache ways. I lied, said yes. Truth was, missionaries beat children who spoke Apache language, practiced Apache customs. After 2 years, I remembered little. Isabella's face reflected the horror she felt at this revelation. They deliberately tried to erase your identity. Yes, they called it killing the Indian to save the man. His voice remained steady, though. The pain of those years was evident in his eyes. Cut our hair, gave us new names, taught us shame for our people's ways. Yet you still keep your medicine bundle, Isabella observed. Some part of you resisted. Lone Wolf nodded. Small rebellions, secret prayers, whispered stories after dark. A hint of pride entered his voice. They could not take everything. And then you became a scout, Isabella prompted gently. At 17, ran away from school. Tried to find my band, but they had been moved to reservation far away. His expression hardened. Had no place in white world, no place in Apache world. Scout seemed only path. Used skills from both worlds to survive. Isabella absorbed his story with thoughtful attention. Thank you, she said finally, for sharing this with me. I understand better now why you ... double quotes. She hesitated. Why I bought bride with chickens. A rare smile ghosted across his face. Why you understand what it means to be caught between worlds. She corrected. To belong nowhere and everywhere at once. The insight surprised him. This woman, with a refined upbringing and education, had somehow grasped the essential truth of his existence. The perpetual state of being neither fully one thing nor another. Always an outsider looking in. Yes, he acknowledged. This is... Why, the fire had burned low again, and outside the cabin, the first hints of dawn lightened the eastern sky. Isabella yawned, the emotional exhaustion of her nightmare, and their subsequent conversation finally claiming its toll. You should rest more, Lone Wolf suggested, rising to his feet, few hours before true daylight. She nodded, but made no move to lie down. Lone Wolf, she said hesitantly, would you mind if I looked at your medicine bundle again? Not to touch it, she added quickly, just to see it. It brings me comfort somehow, knowing you have that connection to your mother, to your heritage. The request was unexpected, but touched him deeply. He retrieved the bundle and placed it where she could see it from her pallet. My mother made similar one for me when I left, he said. Soldiers took it first day at school. This one I made later, with items I collected in secret. Not as powerful as true bundle made by medicine woman, but ... double quotes. He shrugged. It helps. Thank you. Isabella said softly, settling back onto her pallet. For everything. As Lone Wolf returned to his blanket by the fire, he reflected on the strange turns his life had taken. 3 weeks ago, he had been alone, adrift between cultures, belonging nowhere and to no one. Now his cabin sheltered this proud, wounded Spanish woman who somehow understood his divided existence better than anyone he had met in years. Not a true wife, perhaps, but something equally valuable and far more unexpected. A friend. Outside, coyotes called to each other across the desert, their eerie voices neither fully dog nor fully wolf creatures of the in-between spaces, adapting and surviving against all odds. Like us, Lone Wolf thought as sleep finally reclaimed him. Like us, 3 days later, a messenger from Fort Willow arrived at their cabin as the morning sun crested the eastern hills. Isabella was tending the garden when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She straightened, hand instinctively moving to the knife she now kept always at her waist. Lone Wolf emerged from the corral, his posture alert but not alarmed. The rider wore the blue uniform of a cavalry private, his horse lathered from hard riding. "Scout," the soldier called. "Captain Thornton needs you at the fort. Urgent." Lone Wolf approached the rider, his expression giving away nothing. "What happened?" "Stage was attacked yesterday, 10 miles north. Driver killed, passengers robbed." The young soldier shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. "Captain says bring your gear for a long scout. Could be 5 days, maybe more." Isabella felt a chill despite the warm morning. 5 days alone in the cabin, with the memory of Harlow and his threats still fresh. Lone Wolf's expression revealed similar concerns as he glanced her way. "When does Captain need me?" he asked the messenger. "Now. He's organizing a patrol to leave by noon." The soldier's gaze shifted curiously to Isabella, then back to Lone Wolf. "Said to tell you there's good pay for this job. Government paymaster. Was on that stage. Money they desperately needed with winter approaching." Isabella could see the conflict in Lone Wolf's stance duty to his employer versus concern for her safety. "Tell Captain I come soon," Lone Wolf decided. "Need 1 hour to prepare." The soldier nodded and wheeled his horse, clearly eager to deliver the message and return to the fort. As the hoofbeats faded, Lone Wolf turned to Isabella. "Not safe for you alone," he said simply. "Not with Harlow making threats." Isabella had been thinking the same thing. "Could I stay at the fort while you're gone?" she suggested. Surely the captain's wife would. "No officers' wives at Fort Willow," Lone Wolf interrupted. "Small outpost. Only, men only." He frowned, considering options. "Jackson's wife might take you in. Or ... double quotes." He hesitated. "Or," Isabella prompted, "you could come with scout party." The idea clearly concerned him, even as he suggested it. Not usual. Captain might refuse, but safer than staying alone. Isabella weighed the alternatives. Staying with Martha Jackson would mean returning to town, where Harlow and his companions might be lurking. Remaining alone at the cabin left her vulnerable to various threats. Accompanying a military expedition would be physically demanding and potentially dangerous in other ways. But at least she would be with Lone Wolf. "I'll come with you," she decided. "If the captain allows it." Lone Wolf studied her face. "Journey. Hard. Sleeping on ground. Cold nights. Maybe danger." "I'm stronger than I look," she reminded him. "And I've endured worse than discomfort." He nodded once, accepting her decision. "Pack warm clothes. Food for 2 days. Knife. I prepare horses." Plural? Isabella had only ever seen the one Pinto Lone Wolf rode. "Have second horse, older Maury. Gentle but strong." He was already moving toward the corral. "No saddle for you. Make pad from blankets." The next hour passed in a flurry of activity. Isabella gathered food supplies and spare clothing, rolling them tightly in a blanket as she'd seen Lone Wolf do with his own gear. She changed into her sturdiest dress and tied her hair back securely, practical considerations overriding any concern for appearance. Meanwhile, Lone Wolf prepared 2 horses, his pinto, and an older bay mare with a white blaze down her face. True to his word, he fashioned a riding pad from blankets for Isabella, securing it with leather straps in lieu of a proper saddle. Not as comfortable as saddle, he apologized. But Mare has smooth gait. Easier riding. As they prepared to leave, Lone Wolf took one last precaution, securing the cabin door with a heavy wooden bar he'd apparently made for just such occasions. Won't stop determined man, he acknowledged, but shows cabin not abandoned. Makes random. Thieves think twice. The ride to Fort Willow took nearly 2 hours at a pace manageable for Isabella, who had limited experience on horseback. Lone Wolf led them along bean trails rather than the main road, moving with the quiet efficiency that marked all his actions. Captain may not want woman on scout, he warned as the fort came into view, its wooden palisade stark against the blue sky. If he refuses, we find other solution. Isabella nodded, though anxiety knotted her stomach. What other solution could there be, with danger seemingly on all sides? Fort Willow proved smaller than she had imagined, a collection of rough wooden buildings surrounded by a log palisade, with a dusty parade ground at its center. Soldiers in various states of uniform hurried about, preparing for the expedition. Many paused to stare as Lone Wolf rode through the gate with Isabella, following on the bay mare. Captain Thornton emerged from the largest building, his red beard neatly trimmed beneath a weathered face. His eyebrows rose at the sight of Isabella. "Scout," he greeted Lone Wolf, deliberately ignoring Isabella for the moment. "Glad you came quickly. Situation's worse than I thought. 2 more stages reported trouble in the last month. Seems we've got organized raiders working the territory." "Apache?" Lone Wolf asked, dismounting. "Don't think so. Witnesses describe white men, faces covered, using army tactics." Thornton's expression darkened. "Might be deserters. Or worse, current soldiers moonlighting as bandits." Only now did he acknowledge Isabella with a curt nod. "Ma'am, didn't expect to see you here." "My wife comes with scout party," Lone Wolf stated, his tone making it clear this wasn't a request. The captain's eyebrows rose higher. "That's highly irregular, Scout. This isn't a pleasure ride." "She not safe alone at cabin," Lone Wolf explained. "Trouble with Collins' ranch hands. Threats made." Understanding dawned in Thornton's eyes. "Harlow and his bunch?" When Lone Wolf nodded, the captain sighed. "That man's a powder keg waiting for a spark. Still, this is a military expedition, not a protective detail for civilians." Isabella straightened in her improvised saddle. "Captain, I assure you I won't be a burden. I can ride, cook, tend to minor injuries, and I need very little in the way of comforts." She met his gaze directly. "More importantly, I can help your scout do his job effectively by ensuring he isn't distracted by concerns for my safety back at the cabin." Thornton studied her with newfound interest. "You're educated?" he observed. "Unusual out here. My father believed women's minds deserved cultivation as much as men's," she replied evenly. A hint of a smile touched the captain's weathered face. Did he now? "Mine too, though most would disagree." He turned back to Lone Wolf. "She's your responsibility, Scout. If she slows us down or causes problems, she returns to the fort immediately under escort." "Clear?" "Clear," Lone Wolf agreed, visible relief in his posture. "We leave in 1 hour. Full patrol 12 men plus Lieutenant Brooks, the scout party, and now your wife." Thornton handed Lone Wolf a folded paper. "Here's where the stage was. Hit. I want you to find their trail and where they're headed." These aren't random attacks, they're too organized. Someone's planning these raids carefully. As the captain strode away, shouting orders to his men, Lone Wolf turned to Isabella. "You convinced him," he said, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Men, like the captain, respect directness and practicality," she replied. "My father taught me that much about dealing with military types." For the next hour, they prepared for the expedition. Lone Wolf introduced Isabella to the survey team that would accompany the patrol, a government engineer named Matthews and his assistant, a bookish young man called Harper. Matthews' wife was also present, a pinch-faced woman in an impractical traveling dress who regarded Isabella with poorly concealed disdain. Another woman. How unexpected, Mrs. Matthews said, her tone suggesting it was unwelcome rather than surprising. "And you are Isabella, Lone Wolf's wife." She used the term deliberately, having learned that any other explanation would invite more questions and likely more prejudice. The scout's wife? How ... unusual. Mrs. Matthews adjusted her hat, a ridiculous confection of ribbons and artificial flowers entirely unsuited to the frontier. "I wasn't aware that his kind took legal wives." Isabella felt her spine stiffen at the casual bigotry. "His kind, Mrs. Matthews?" "Well, you know, Indians." The woman had the grace to look slightly uncomfortable at her own rudeness. "I just mean, it's not common, especially with a Spanish lady such as yourself. I find that love often transcends social expectations," Isabella replied coolly. "Don't you agree?" Before Mrs. Matthews could respond, her husband called her away to help with their baggage, leaving Isabella with the small satisfaction of having temporarily silenced the woman's condescension. Lone Wolf approached, leading their horses. "Problems?" he asked, having observed the exchange from a distance. "Nothing worth mentioning," Isabella assured him. "Just the usual prejudices." He nodded, understanding without need for elaboration. "Stay close to me during journey. Some soldiers have bad reputation with women." The warning was unnecessary. Isabella had no intention of straying from Lone Wolf's side in this company of strange men. But his concern touched her nonetheless. At noon precisely, the expedition departed Fort Willow, heading north along the stage road. Captain Thornton led the column, with Lieutenant Brooks, a thin, nervous-looking young man with a wispy attempt at a mustache riding at his side. The 12 cavalrymen followed in formation, rifles ready. The Matthews couple rode in a small wagon, driven by the assistant Harper. Lone Wolf and Isabella brought up the rear, a position that allowed the scout to observe the surrounding landscape. Without the dust of the column obscuring tracks, Isabella found the Marais gait reasonably comfortable despite the improvised saddle. The rhythmic motion of riding and the wide-open vistas of the Arizona landscape provided a strange sense of freedom after the confines of the cabin. She understood, watching Lone Wolf's easy posture on horseback, why the Apache valued their mobility so highly. There was power in movement, and the ability to travel unhindered across the land. They made good time through the afternoon, stopping briefly at the site of the stage robbery. Isabella remained with the horses while Lone Wolf examined the scene, reading signs invisible to others in the disturbed earth and scattered debris. 4 men, he reported to Captain Thornton after his inspection. Good horses. 1 man heavier than others. All wore boots, not moccasins, not Indians. Erection? The captain prompted. Lone Wolf pointed northeast, toward a distant line of hills. They separate after. 2 go that way. 2 go more east. Meeting place probably in hills. Thornton nodded, satisfied. Can you follow both trails? Follow main trail first. 2 heaviest riders, probably leaders. Lone Wolf's eyes scanned the horizon. Need to make camp soon. Losing light for tracking. The captain agreed, and they proceeded another mile before finding a suitable campsite near a small spring. The Soldiers efficiently established a perimeter, while Matthews and Harper struggled with their tent. Mrs. Matthews supervised from a camp chair, occasionally casting disapproving glances toward Isabella, who was helping Lone Wolf prepare their simple camp. "Your wife seems put out that you're being useful," Lone Wolf observed quietly as Isabella gathered wood for their fire. She smiled at his unexpected perception. "Mrs. Matthews believes a lady should never soil her hands with manual labor. Unfortunately, for her, the frontier cares little for such niceties." "You adapt well," he said, arranging stones for a fire ring. "Many white women," he caught himself. "Many women from towns struggle with this life." "Necessity is a powerful teacher," Isabella replied. "Besides, I find I prefer the honesty of physical work to the artificial constraints of polite society." As darkness fell, the camp separated into natural group soldiers around their fires. The Matthews party in their tent, Captain Thornton and Lieutenant Brooks huddled over maps spread on a crate. Lone Wolf and Isabella sat slightly apart, sharing a simple meal of jerky and hardtack. The separation wasn't lost on Isabella. Even here, in the wilderness where social distinctions should matter less, the invisible boundaries of race and status remained firmly in place. "Always this way," Lone Wolf commented, following her gaze to the segregated camp. "Blue coats keep distance from scout. White civilians keep distance from all." "And where do I fit in this arrangement?" Isabella mused. "Too Spanish for the whites, too educated for the frontier, too associated with an Apache to be accepted by either." Lone Wolf considered this. "You make your own place," he said finally. "Like me, between worlds but belonging to yourself." The insight struck Isabella as profoundly true. She had spent so much of her life trying to fit into prescribed roles, dutiful daughter, obedient wife, that the concept of defining her own place seemed both terrifying and exhilarating. As they prepared their bedrolls, Captain Thornton approached their fire. "Scout, I want you to check both trails at first light. Take one of my men with you if you need to split up." Lone Wolf shook his head. "Better alone. Soldiers make too much noise. Miss signs?" The captain nodded, unsurprised by the response. His gaze shifted to Isabella. "Ma'am, you'll stay with the main party while your husband scouts. We'll move slower tomorrow, following his directions." "Of course, Captain," Isabella agreed, though the prospect of being separated from Lone Wolf, even temporarily, made her uneasy. After Thornton departed, Lone Wolf spread his map on the ground between them, weighing the corners with stones. It was unlike any map Isabella had seen before, a patchwork of official survey lines combined with hand-drawn features and notations in both English and what she assumed was Apache. "Tomorrow I follow trails here." He indicated 2 paths marked in pencil. "Raiders know territory well. Use these canyons for hiding." His finger traced a complex network of narrow valleys. "Many places for ambush." "You think they might attack the patrol?" Isabella asked, concern sharpening her voice. "Possible. Raiders bold, well-armed. Patrol tempting target with payroll money." He studied the map with focused intensity. "Need to find their camp before they know we follow." The map between them represented more than just geography. It was a visual representation of the danger they faced, the complex, treacherous terrain ahead, both literally and figuratively. Isabella felt a familiar tightening in her chest, the sensation of walls closing in that had been her constant companion during her marriage to Vicente. Lone Wolf must have sensed her disquiet. "We face this together," he said quietly. "I not leave you unprotected." The simple promise eased something in Isabella's heart. How strange that this man, who had been a stranger mere weeks ago, now represented safety in her mind. Not because of any romantic attachment, but because of something far more fundamental: mutual respect and a shared understanding of what it meant to navigate hostile territory, both physical and social. As they settled into their bedrolls, positioned modestly apart, but within the same small circle of firelight, Isabella found herself studying Lone Wolf's profile against the star-filled sky. In repose, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing the young man he must have been before life's hardships had carved permanent vigilance into his features. "Lone Wolf," she said softly, "thank you for bringing me with you, for not leaving me behind." He turned his head slightly to meet her gaze. "We made agreement to face what comes together." "Yes," she acknowledged, "we did. It wasn't quite a marriage vow, but in that moment, beneath the vast Arizona sky with danger lurking in the shadows beyond their fire, it felt equally binding. Whatever came next, raiders or ranchers, prejudice or physical hardship, they would face it as a unit, each making the other stronger by their presence. Isabella slept more soundly that night than she had in years, despite the hard ground beneath her blanket and the unfamiliar sounds of the military camp around them. In the strange arithmetic of the frontier, subtracting comfort had somehow added security. Dawn arrived with a chorus of birdsong and the efficient sounds of a military camp, stirring to life. Lone Wolf was already gone when Isabella opened her eyes, his bedroll neatly packed beside her. A cup of coffee and a piece of hardtack sat on a nearby stone. His parting gesture. Captain Thornton approached as she was rolling her blankets. "Your husband left at first light," he informed her. "Said to tell you he'll rejoin us by midday. We're moving out in 30 minutes. Isabella nodded, appreciating that Lone Wolf had thought to leave a message. "Thank you, Captain. I'll be ready." The day unfolded according to plan at first. The patrol moved slowly northward, following the general direction Lone Wolf had indicated. Isabella rode near the middle of the column, keeping a respectful distance from Mrs. Matthews' wagon, but avoiding the rear, where several soldiers had been casting appreciative glances her way. By mid-morning, they had entered rolling hill country, the landscape increasingly broken by dry washes and rocky outcroppings. Perfect ambush territory, Isabella thought, remembering Lone Wolf's concerns from the previous night. She found herself scanning the horizon constantly, a habit she'd unconsciously adopted from him. When Lone Wolf finally returned, appearing silently on a ridge above their line of march, Isabella felt a disproportionate sense of relief. He conferred briefly with Captain Thornton, their conversation too distant to overhear, but their serious expressions spoke volumes. As the patrol halted for a brief rest, Lone Wolf made his way to Isabella's side. "Found Raiders' camp," he reported in a low voice. 6 men at least, well armed, military saddles, new rifles. Deserters, as the captain suspected? Maybe, or soldiers still in service. His expression was grim. Camp well hidden in Box Canyon. Good water, good defense position. They planned to stay. "What will Captain Thornton do?" Isabella asked, offering her canteen, which Lone Wolf accepted with a nod of thanks. "Want to capture raiders, recover stolen money. Planning attack at dawn. Tomorrow." He took a long drink, then wiped his mouth with the back of his hand. "You stay with supply wagon during fight. Safer." Isabella started to protest, then thought better of it. She had no illusions about her ability to contribute to a military engagement. "Be careful," she said instead. "These men sound dangerous." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Always careful. How I lived so long as scout." As they prepared to resume the march, Lieutenant Brooks approached, leading his horse. The young officer had barely spoken 2 words to either of them since the expedition began. "Mrs. ... He faltered, apparently realizing he didn't know Isabella's surname. "Isabella is fine, Lieutenant," she supplied, saving him from his discomfort. "Yes, well, Mrs. Isabella. The captain suggested you might ride in the wagon with Mrs. Matthews for the remainder of the journey. The terrain ahead is becoming rather rough." Isabella glanced at the wagon, where Mrs. Matthews sat like a queen, holding court, fanning herself dramatically despite the mild October weather. The prospect of enduring the woman's thinly veiled condescension for hours was decidedly unappealing. "Thank you, Lieutenant, but I'm quite comfortable on horseback," she declined politely. "The mare has a very smooth gait." Brooks looked relieved, likely having anticipated her refusal. "As you wish, ma'am. Just stay in the middle of the column. If you please. Scout reports possible hostile activity ahead." As the lieutenant returned to his position, Lone Wolf materialized at Isabella's side, helping her mount the mare. "Good decision," he murmured. "Matthew's woman has sharp tongue and many complaints." Isabella smiled at his assessment. "I noticed. How does she survive out here? Husband important to army. Maps new territories for forts, settlements." Lone Wolf adjusted the mare's bridle. "Captain must protect them, but not like the duty." The patrol moved into increasingly rugged country as the day progressed. By late afternoon, they had entered a labyrinth of small canyons and ridges, forcing the column into single file along narrow trails. Isabella could sense the rising tension among the soldiers, their hands never far from their weapons, as they scanned the high ground for potential threats. Lone Wolf alternated between scouting ahead and dropping back to check on Isabella, his concern evident despite his usual stoic expression. During one such return, he handed her a small leather pouch. "Keep with you," he instructed. "Apache medicine for protection. Made this morning before leaving camp." Isabella accepted the gift, touched by both the gesture and the fact that he had taken time during his scouting to prepare something for her safety. The pouch contained herbs she couldn't identify, their pungent scent escaping as she tied it to her belt. "Thank you," she said simply. He nodded once, then returned to his position at the head of the column dot. By evening, they had reached a small plateau with good visibility in all directions, a defensible position for the night camp. As the soldiers established their perimeter, Captain Thornton called his officers and Lone Wolf for a strategy meeting. Isabella busied herself preparing their campsite, aware of Mrs. Matthews' disapproving gaze from the comfort of her camp chair. "You actually do manual labor," the woman observed as Isabella passed with an armload of firewood. "How frontier of you." Isabella paused, weighing the benefits of politeness against the satisfaction of a sharp retort. "We each adapt to our circumstances in our own way, Mrs. Matthews." "Indeed." The woman adjusted her lace cuffs an absurdly impractical garment for field conditions. "Though I must say, adapting to life with with your particular husband seems an extreme adjustment for a woman of obvious education." The thinly veiled insult to Lone Wolf sparked Isabella's temper. "My husband is an honorable man who treats me with respect and kindness. Many women, married to so-called gentlemen, cannot say the same." Mrs. Matthews' eyes widened at the implied rebuke. "Well, I was merely making conversation. No need to be defensive." "Of course," Isabella replied smoothly. "Just as you needn't be judgmental about matters beyond your understanding." She continued to her campsite, aware she had likely made an enemy, but feeling a quiet satisfaction nonetheless. The time when she would have silently endured such condescension to maintain social harmony was behind her. When Lone Wolf returned from the strategy meeting, his expression was more serious than usual. "Raiders closer than we thought," he reported, quietly as they shared a simple dinner. "Captain plans to surround Canyon before dawn, capture them in camp. Is it dangerous?" Isabella asked, already knowing the answer, but needing to hear it from him. "Yes, raiders well armed, desperate men." He met her gaze directly. "If fighting starts, stay low and wagon. Do not run in open." The stark warning sent a chill through Isabella, despite the warmth of their small fire. "I understand." They sat in companionable silence as night deepened around the camp. The usual sounds of soldiers settling in for the evening quiet conversations, the metallic sounds